Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Hey, Daf 5 of Masechta Sukkah. Today's Daf, the sort of main goal, I'd say, of today's Daf is to determine how we know that the minimum size of a Sukkah is 10 Tfachim. The first option of which is based on the Aron, and then we get into a discussion of how we know that the Kapores, the cover of the Aron, was in fact 1 tefach tall. So that is what we have on today's daf. So we're going to start on daf Daled Amud Beis, about 6 lines from the bottom or so, 2, 4, 6. So of course the Mishnah had said that if the sukkah is less than 10 tefachim tall, so it's too small, it's too short. Minolan, how do we know the Maaseh that a sukkah needs to be a minimum of 10 tefachim tall? Itmar. It was stated by Amoraim, Rab Chanina, Rab Yochanan, Rab Chaviva. Okay, this group of Amoraim. Now, Masnu, they taught. Now, B'chulei Seder Moed Kol Ki Azuga Chalufe Rab Yochanan Ma'ale Rab Yonasan. Apparently, whenever you have this group of Rab Chanina, Rab Yochanan, and Rab Chaviva, there are those apparently that swap Rab Yochanan for Rab Yonasan. So, Chevre, it's a free country. You could do what you want. Arun Tisha v'Chapores Tefach Harikan Asar. Okay. Well, the Aron, which we know all about from Masechta Yoma, was 9 tefachim tall. Okay. V'Chapores Tefach, and the lid, the covering of the Aron, the Kapores, was 1 tefach tall. Harikan Asar, which means that the Aron had a height of 10 tefachim. Uchsiv, and the pasuk says, "V'no'adti l'chasham v'dibarti itcha me'al hakaporos." The pasuk says that the Eibishter says that he will sort of meet with Moshe Darton on top of the kaporos. V'dibarti itcha me'al hakaporos. I'll speak to you from on top of the kaporos, on top of the Aron, essentially, on top of the lid, the covering of the Aron. So the top of the covering of the Aron was 10 tefachim from the ground. V'tanya, and we learn in the Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, me'olam l'yod shechina lamata, that and there's a ghost v'tzurim adds me'asar. Okay, that the divine presence never went down lower than 10 tefachim, right? So went within 10 tefachim of the ground. So we see that the Eibishter spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu on above the top of the kaporos, so 10 tefachim above the ground, and it says that the Eibishter never went within 10 tefachim of the ground. He never went lower down than the top of the Aron. So, as Rashi says, that indicates that a rishus is 10 tefachim tall. Like we know also, from Otzah and Shabbos, that above 10 tefachim is a makom p'tur. Right, that kilo rishus is 10 tefachim. So, and the inverse is true as well. Just like the Eibishter doesn't come down to the ground, to the earth, doesn't come within 10 tefachim of the ground. So also, people don't go up to the heavens. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Eliyahu Hanavi, they didn't actually technically go up to the heavens. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Hashemayim Shemayim L'Hashem, Ba'aretz Nasan L'Bnei Adam. There are borders over here. Right? There's, everyone's got their place. The Eibishter, Hashemayim Shemayim L'Hashem. The heavens are for the Eibishter. Ba'aretz Nasan L'Bnei Adam. And the land is given to the people. So, the people stay on the earth, the Eibishter is in the heavens, and they don't completely swap. Kilu, you're not going to have people going all the way up to the heavens, you're not going to have the Eibishter come within 10 tefachim of the ground. 1 second, fact the Gemara. Is that really true that the divine presence never came down to the earth, never came within 10 tefachim of the ground? The pasuk says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that the Eibishter went down on Har Sinai. It sounds like he mamish came down to Har Sinai within 10 tefachim, mamish. L'mayla me'asar tefachim. They say, no, even that was above 10 tefachim from Har Sinai. But the pasuk says that at the time of Mashiach, so the Eibishter is going to stand on Har Azeisim, on the Mount of Olives. That also is going to be above 10 tefachim from the Mount of Olives. Okay, but now Moshe and Eliyahu Hanavi, they didn't go up to the heavens. The Apostle says, Moshe ala Elokim, that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to God. That was also, he didn't go all the way up to God. It was lower than 10 tefachim below God. But the pasuk says that Eliyahu went up in like a storm to the heavens. That also was above 10 tefachim from the heavens. Didn't reach within 10 tefachim of the heavens. But the pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu was holding. I think it's Moshe Rabbeinu. Can't remember. Machis Pnei Kisei, that he was holding onto the throne of God. Parshas alav ananu, and Parshas is va'amar tanchum mlamet sheper shaka miziv shchinoso va'ananu alav. That the Eibishter Parshas that he sheperesh, that he separated miziv from the splendor of his divine presence. Va'ananu alav, and his cloud was like, I think I'm Moshe Rabbeinu. The Matim Asar, we still say that was below 10 Tvachim. Okay, but it says that he was mamish holding on to the throne of God. That must have been in heaven. No, the Eibishter like lowered down the Kisei HaKavod to 10 Tvachim away from the heavens, and then he held on to it from there. Alright, gets a little bit abstract, Darton. The point, of course, being that the Eibishter does not come within 10 tefachim of the ground, of the earth, and people don't go within 10 tefachim of the heavens. So now, we see from there that a reshus is considered 10 tefachim, and therefore a sukkah, which needs walls, has to be at least 10 tefachim tall. Sounds good to me, right? Bishlama Aron Tisha. So now the Gemara questions our premise of shtickle, which is that we just assumed that the Aron and the Kapores are 10 tefachim tall, and the Eibishter spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu on top of the Kapores, so he never comes within 10 tefachim, so 10 tefachim is a reshus, and that's a minimum height of a sukkah. Fine. But how do we really know, Lemaise, that the Aron was 10 tefachim tall? We said because the Aron is 9 and the Kapores is another tefach. How do we know all this? So Bishlama Aron Tisha, so okay, I understand why the Aron is 9 tefachim tall. The Chsiv, as the pasuk says, V'asu Aron atze shitim, that you make the Aron out of shitim wood. Amasayim v'chetzi orko, 2.5 amas long, v'ama v'chetzi rochbo, and 1.5 amas wide. V'ama v'chetzi komaso, and 1.5 amas tall. So now an amma, of course, is 6 tefachim. 1.5 amas is therefore 9 tefachim. So I understand that the Aron was 9 tefachim tall. How do I know that the lid, that the kapores, was a tefach tall? How do we know that? The Tani, that it was taught, the Tani Reb Chanina taught, Moshe, that all of the vessels that Moshe Rabbeinu made, for all of them, the Torah said how long it is, how wide it is, how tall it is, the 3 dimensions. Kapores, however, when it comes to the kapores, midas orko, midas rochba, nosna, the Torah told us how long and how wide it should be. 2.5 amas long, 1.5 amas wide, to be able to cover the Aron. However, midas komasalo nosna, the Torah did not tell us how tall the kapores is. And therefore we have to figure out how tall the kapores is. Okay, so if we have to figure out the height of the kapores, well, let's find the lowest common denominator. Let's find the vessel that has the lowest height, and we'll assume that that is the height of the kapores. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Vasisula misgeres tofach saviv malalon tefach afkan tefach." So the Gemara wants to say that when it comes to the shulchan, the table that they would put the breads on, so there was a frame. There was a frame on the shulchan, and we'll get a little bit later, we'll get into details about where exactly was this frame, but there was a frame on the shulchan, and the frame was a tefach. And since the frame of the shulchan was a tefach, so let's say that we'll use that height as well for the kapores, and say that the height of the kapores is a tefach. So the Aron is 9 tefachim tall, the kapores we figure out to be 1 tefach tall, a total of 10 tfachim. And ultimately that's what we're going to say is the height of the sukkah as well. Frek the Gemara. How come we have to learn it out from the frame of the shulchan? Why not learn it out from the kelim themselves and use the height of the kelim? I don't know. The aron was 1.5 amas tall, I guess, or the shulchan. What was the height of the shulchan? Was it like 2 amas tall or 1 amma tall, something like that? I can't remember. But how come we're using like the smallest part of like the shulchan with this miskeret, this frame? Why not use the kelim themselves, which were larger? Tafasta merubah tafasta, tafasta mu'ah tafasta. Answers the Gemara. Well, we have a principle. Tafasta merubah tafasta. If you try to, take too much, you end up with, nothing or less. Whereas tafasta mu'ah tafasta. If you take something smaller, then it works out better. And Rashi explains it in an interesting way. Actually, he says, if you have an option, you have 2 choices, right? One is to take the smaller amount. One is to take the larger amount. Well, if you take the larger amount, well, what happens if it turns out that you're supposed to take the smaller amount? So then lo tafasta, you have to take away from what you had. You end up losing something, right? Whereas if you take the smaller amount and it turns out you're supposed to get the larger amount, so then you add on to what you have. You don't lose anything. You actually add on. And if it turns out that you were supposed to take the smaller amount, so you're left with what you had in the first place. But you're never going to have to take away anything. Whereas if you take the larger amount, if it doesn't work out, you're going to lose something. So tafasta merubah lo tafasta. That if you take too much and it turns out that you made a mistake, then you're going to have to give back, which is shtickle shver, if you take the lower amount, then it turns out that you're allowed to take more, so you can always add more, which is gewaldig. And if not, so then at least you're stuck with what you're left with what you have, but you're not going to end up losing anything. So tafasta merubah lo tafasta. That, as a principle, as a mahalach. So, if you try to take too much, you might end up losing. Whereas tafasta mu'ah tafasta, if you take the smaller amount, then, at the very least, you're at least going to have what you took. And therefore, if we have an option to learn out from the kelim, which are larger, or from the frame, which is just the tefach, let's learn out from that, because we know that that's sort of a safer bet. V'neilef mitzitz, the Gemara. Okay, so if we're looking for small items, why don't we learn out from the tzitz, from the gold plate that ran across the forehead of the Kohen Gadol? Titanes, we learn in a brayso, tzitz dome kimintas shozav, that the tzitz was a gold plate, v'rochav beis etzbos, and its width was 2 finger breadths, umukaf me'ozen la'ozen, and it went from one ear to the other. V'chasvalav beishitin, and there were 2 lines of text on it. Yudhei milamayla v'kodesh lamed milamata. On the first row, on the top row, it said Yud Hey, and on the bottom row it said Kodesh Lamed. Fine, that was on the bottom row. From Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yossi, and he says Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yossi that he saw the tzitz in Rome. V'chasvalav Kodesh Lashem b'shita achas, and it said Kodesh Lashem on one line. Okay. So it says Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yossi, and we saw this Gemara in Shabbos, that he saw the tzitz in Rome. Wow. And it said Kodesh Lashem in one line. Chevre, what's the point? The point is that the tzitz was 2 finger breadths, which is larger than an amma. An amma, I believe, tefach. Tefach, I believe, is 4 finger breadths. And the tzitz is 2 finger breadths, which is half that size. So why don't we say that the kaporis was 2 finger breadths? So, and for the Gemara done in Kli Mikliv and done in Kli Mitachshit, well, we prefer to learn, the kaporis of the aron from the miskeres of the shulchan, rather from the tzitz, which isn't a vessel. It's like a adornment. V'neilef mizer. Okay. But why don't we learn out the height of the tefach from the zer? What's the zer? The zer is not entirely clear, but there are a few things that had a zer. A zer is like a crown. The shulchan had a zer. The mizbeach had a zer. I think even the aron had a zer. The amar zer mashu. And we say that the zer, this crown, could be any height. And therefore, why don't we say that the kaporis isn't necessarily a tefach? It's any height, just like the zer. Done in kli mi kli and done in kli mi hechsher kli. So the Gemara answers, well, we learn out vessels from vessels. We don't learn out vessels from designs of vessels, from complementary parts of vessels. And therefore this crown is kind of like not like the kli itself, it's a hechsher kli. Something that's needed to kind of support the kli. Okay, as opposed to so therefore we'd prefer to learn out the height of the kaporis from the frame of the shulchan, which is considered actually part of the kli, as opposed to from the zer, which is the crown, which is a hechsher kli, and fine. So that's how we know the tefach of the kaporis. Yachim misgeres nami hechsher kliu. In fact, the Gemara, but shouldn't the frame of the table also be considered a hechsher kli, just like the zer is a hechsher kli? So, and for the Gemara, miskarto lemata haisa. Well, the frame was below. So this, I said that we were going to sort of get to this a little bit later, so now is later. So there's two opinions about what the misgeret of the shulchan is. So the shulchan, of course, is the table that they would put the lechem aponim on. Now, part of this table was that there was a misgeres, there was a frame, and there's a machlokas about what exactly this frame was. One opinion, which we just expressed now, is that it's below the table, meaning imagine a table, 4 legs with like a board on top. Then there was this block of wood that ran from one leg to the other. And then the block of wood that was the tabletop was on top of the 4 legs that had sort of this block going from one leg in between each of the 4 legs to, I guess, make it sturdier, right? So imagine 4 legs with a tabletop on top, and then from one leg to the other, right beneath the tabletop, was this block of wood. That was the miskeres. So according to this view, the miskeres was mamish part of the table, right? It was like part of the structure of the table. Now the other view is that the miskeret was actually more of like a frame on top of the table. Now in that case, it's more of a decorative kind of thing. In which case, it should be no different than the zer, which is sort of a hechsher kli. And if that's the case, if the miskeret is a hechsher kli and the zer is a hechsher kli, well then we may as well learn out from the zer, which was even smaller than the miskeret. So the Gemara says that, okay, so if we say that the miskeret was mamish part of the kli, and that's why we're learning out the height of the kaporis from the height of the miskeres, well that makes sense if you said the miskeres was limata, was between, from one leg to the other, and therefore was mamish part of the table. But according to the opinion that the frame of the table was above the table, so then it's basically just a hechsher kli. High hechsher kli. So if it's a hechsher kli, then you may as well learn it out from the zer, which is also a hechsher kli and was less than a tefach. So the dana davishnit about Torah mida, midavishnit about Torah mida, vayochichu tzitz v'zer, shlonit about Torah mida. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why we'll learn it out from the miskeres, because the miskeres, the Torah gives a size for it. A tefach, right? We'll see some miskeres tofach. That the miskeres is a tefach. And also the kaporis has a size. I assume what this means that the size of the kaporis is 2.5 amos long and 1.5 amos wide. So we see that the miskeres has that the kaporis has a size. We don't know what the height is, but I guess we know that it's 2.5 amos long and 1.5 amos wide. So the kaporis has a size and the miskeres has a size. So we learn out something that that has a size from another thing that has a size, as opposed to the zer and the tzitz, where the Torah doesn't specifically tell us what the size is, and therefore we don't learn out from them. Rather, when we want to learn the height of the kaporis, it is a tefach tall, because we learn it out from the miskeres, which is a tefach tall. Well, there you have it. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, Rab Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva, that they say that the aron was 10 tefachim tall, and because the aron was 10 tefachim tall, so that's essentially how the aron was 9 tefachim, the kaporis was 1 tefach. That's essentially how we learn out that the sukkah is a minimum height of 10 tefachim. Rav Huna Amar Me'acha. Rav Huna says from here, right? So we just said that the So how did we just prove that the height of the kaporis was 1 tefach from the miskeres? Rav Huna says that I'll tell you that the height of the kaporis is a tefach from the following. Al pnei kaporis kedma, that of course we know from Masechta Yoma that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would sprinkle the blood of the cow, of the goat, opposite the kaporis. Right? Al pnei kaporis kedma, opposite the kaporis to the east. So it says al pnei kaporis, from the face of the kaporis. Ve'in panim pachus mitefach, and a human face is no shorter than 1 tefach. Ve'ika ke'ape de bar yuchni. In fact, the Gemara, but what about the face of a bar yuchni, of this big bird that is larger than a tefach? Tafasta mubalo tafasta, tafasta mua tafasta. So again, going back to our principle of tafasta mubalo tafasta, we say, look, let's go for the lowest common denominator and say that we're talking about the face of a human, not a bar yuchni. Ve'emakape de tziprisa, de zuter tuva. Well then, why don't we compare the, so then why don't we use the face of like a small little fagel, a small little bird, that its face is even less than a tefach? So then we could say then that the face of the kaporis, the height of the kaporis, was less than a tefach, like the face of a tziprisa. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Huna pnei gamar. So says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, well, Rav Huna taka as a gzeir shava. Ksivacha el pnei kaporis, it says by the kaporis, the face of the kaporis, uchsefasim eis pnei Yitzchak aviv. That it says that by the brachas of Yitzchak Avinu, that Yaakov left me'es pnei aviv, from the face of Yitzchak his father. So we see that pnei is in the context of a human, so we're talking about a human face, not a little bird face. So we're talking about a human face, and that and therefore the height of the kapores is going to be based on the height of a human face. Why don't we learn it out from the face of the Eibishter? That it's like seeing the face of God, and you have appeased me. So why don't we say it's based on the face of God, not on the face of human? Tafasta merubalo tafasta, tafasta mua tafasta. So again, that's too much. Tafasta merubalo tafasta. Okay. So the face of man. V'nelef mikruv. Why don't we learn it out from the face of the kruvim? That the kruvim, that these, angelic kind of, kruvim that were on top of the aron. So the chsiv el kaporis yu pnei kruvim, that the faces of the kruvim will be towards the kaporis of the aron. So we see pnei kruvim, the face of the kruvim. So why don't we say that the height of the kaporis is like, right, it says pnei kaporis, it says pnei kruvim. So the height of the kaporis is like the face of the kruvim. We've learned that the height of the face of the kruvim was a tefach. So there you have it. And Rav Huna can also learn out from the face of the kruvim that the face of the kaporis is a tefach. Givaldig, what do you want me to tell you? So Rav Huna learns out that the height of the tefach of the kaporis is a tefach from the fact of faces, whether it's human faces, whether it's the face of the kruvim. Umay kruv, what exactly is a kruv? Omer Rababo kiravya. Rababo says it means like the face of a child. Shekim bebavel currently nuka ravya. That in Bavel they call a child a ravya. So a kruv is a kiravya, like a face. So it's like it's like a baby, like the face of a baby. Omar le'abai says Abai to Rababo. Okay, what's this aleph I have over here? Rapapa Abai. Taka, that makes more sense, because why would Abai be interacting with the Rabbo? Rabbo was in Eretz Yisrael. Abai, of course, was in Bavel. Abai was also younger. But in the pasuk in Yechezkel, when it's explaining, what was it? I think the Ofanim, that it says that the face of one of them was the face of a kruv, and the face of the second one was the face of a person. Hanu kruv, hanu adam. If we say that a kruv is a baby, well then a baby is a person. So what does it mean that one of them was the face of a baby and the other one was the face of a person? Isn't that the same thing? zutra. And then the Gemara says, well, babies' faces are smaller, people's faces are bigger. When it says, when one of them was the face of a kruv, it means one of them was the face of a baby, and then one of them was pnei adam, like a person, one of them face was the face of an adult. So it's like different size faces. Chevre, how's this going for you? It's fun, right? Right. Now, Frekta Gemara, 1 second. We are trying to prove that the height of the walls of a sukkah have a minimum height of 10 tfachim, because we learned it out from the Aron. But let me ask you something. The Aron was 9 tfachim, the kaporos was 1 tefach, which is a total of 10 tfachim. We want to say that the walls from there must be 10 tfachim, but maybe just like the Aron and the kaporos in total, all in all, were 10 tfachim. Or let's say that when we say that the height of the Aron was 10 tfachim, it includes the kaporos. So maybe then I'll make the argument that the sukkah with the schach needs to be 10 tfachim. Kilu, the wall itself could be lower than 10 tfachim, meaning just like the Aron itself was 9 tfachim and the kaporos was a tefach for a total of 10 tfachim. Maybe I'll make the argument that let's say the walls of a sukkah only need to be 9 tfachim, and then if you have a tefach of schach for a total of 10 tfachim. That doesn't teach me that the walls themselves need to be 10 tfachim, and then the schach is on top of that. Maybe I'll say it's all inclusive. That even with the schach it's 10 tfachim, just like with the kaporos it's 10 tfachim. So ela mi beis olamim gomer. So rather we abort that mahalach. We just spent the entire daf so far explaining how we learn the height of the walls of a sukkah from the Aron, but now we're saying, wait a second, maybe that's not such a good proof, because from there I might think that the walls might not have to be 10 tfachim, just the the total height of the sukkah, including the schach, needs to be 10 tfachim. So therefore, rather we learn out that the height of the walls of the sukkah need to be 10 tfachim from the Beis HaMikdash. We learn out from the Beis HaMikdash. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, describing the Beis HaMikdash, v'bayis asher bana HaMelech Shlomo, that the Beis HaMikdash that was built by Shlomo HaMelech LaHashem for the Eibishter, Shishim Ama Orko. It was 60 amas long, ve'esim rachbo, and it was 20 amas wide, ve'shloshim Ama komaso, and it was 30 amas tall. Okay. Uchsiv, in the pasuk says, Komas akruva echad eser ba'ama, that the height of the kruv was 10 amas. Now, Shlomo HaMelech built these special kruvim. Kilu, in the Mishkan, right, the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu built in the desert, that was in the Mishkan, so there was the Aron, which was 10 tfachim, and then there was these kruvim that were built on top of the Aron, and they were another, well, we'll see in a second how tall they were. But the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu built, constructed, or B'tzalel technically constructed. So the Aron was 10 tfachim, and then the kruvim were on top of the Aron. Now, Shlomo HaMelech, he built kruvim for the Beis HaMikdash. These kruvim were next to I think we even spoke about it in Masechta Sukkah. Now we're in Sukkah. In Masechta Yoma, I think it came up, that there were these kruvim that mamish were standing on the ground. Mamish, these tall kruvim, they were standing on the ground. They had these wings that would span across the entire width of the, between the two kruvim, they would span the entire width of the, I guess it was the Kodesh HaKodashim. So Uchsiv, and it says, Komas akruva echad eser ba'ama. Mechen akruva sheni. That these two kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech built, constructed, that were standing on the ground, standing on their own, so the height of each one was 10 amas tall. So, what do we see? So we see that the height of the Beis HaMikdash was 30 amas tall, and the height of the kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech built were 10 amas tall, i.e. 1/3 of the height. V'tanya, we learn in the Brisa, Mamatzinu b'Beis Olamim, kruvim b'shlusha bayis omdin, just like we see that in the Beis HaMikdash that Shlomo HaMelech built. The kruvim were at a third of the height of the ceiling. Mishkanam mikruvim b'shlish habayis omdin, says the Brisa. So also in the Mishkan, now referring to the kruvim that Moshe Rabbeinu built on top of the Aron, the kruvim, the top of the kruvim were at a height of 1/3 of the Mishkan. Mishkan kamahave. Now what was the height of the Mishkan? Eser amos, it was 10 amos tall. Dichsev, the pasuk says, Eser amos orech hakeresh, that the length of each beam that they used to construct the Mishkan was 10 amos tall. Sukama havadeu shitim poshche, which is 60 amos. Right? So the Mishkan was 10 amos tall. I just said 60 amos, I meant 60 tfachim. So the Mishkan was 60 tfachim tall, right? Each amma is 6 tfachim, so 10 amos is 60 tfachim. Tlase kama ave esim poshche. So what's a third of 60 tfachim? 20 tfachim. So again, we're saying that just like the kruvim that Shlomo Melech constructed, the top of the kruvim, or the height of the kruvim ended at 1/3 the height of the Beis HaMikdash. So also we want to say, says the Brisa, that the kruvim that Moshe Rabbeinu constructed in the Mishkan, which were on top of the Aron, their height ended also at 1/3 of the height of the Mishkan. Now the Mishkan was 60 tfachim, so 1/3 of that is 20 tfachim, which means that the Aron plus the kruvim that were on top of the Aron were a total of 20 tfachim. Talasar the Aron v'chapores. Now subtract from those 20 tfachim the height of the Aron plus the kapores, which was 10 tfachim, pashlu asar, which means that now left what you have remaining for the kruvim is 10 tfachim. Uchsiv, and the pasuk says, "Vayu akruvim parsek nafayim lamala sochachim b'chanfeim ala kapores." Kayirachmana schacha l'mayla me'asara. Let's read that again. Uchsiv, and the pasuk says, "Vayu akruvim parsek nafayim lamala." Now the kruvim in the Mishkan, they had their wings spread above. Sochachim b'chanfeim ala kapores. That acted as schach above the kapores. So we see that above the kapores, there was these kruvim, and the wings of the kruvim, which were at 20 amos, 20 tfachim, the height of the Mishkan, were at 20 tfachim from the ground. They served as schach, and there was 10 tfachim of space between these wings that served as schach and the kapores, which was the top of the Aron. So we see that the space between the kapores, the top of the Aron, and the wings of the kruvim, which served as a schach, was 10 tfachim. But ask the same question that we asked before about the Aron and the kapores. How do you know that the wings were above 10 tfachim from the kapores? Maybe they were on the same level of the head of the kruvim, that maybe the height of the 20 tfachim and thus the height of the 10 tfachim of the kruvim, maybe the wings, which are our schach, are on the same level as the head of the kruvim, i.e., the 10 tfachim includes these wings, and therefore the 10 tfachim of our sukkah would include the schach. It says above. And therefore, if it says above, so kilu, it's the 10 tfachim of the kruvim, and then above that were these wings, which were the schach. And therefore, for our case, for the sukkah, we'd have the walls are 10 tfachim, and then above that would be the schach. Tuva, then we say, yeah, but then maybe the wings were very high above the 10 tfachim height of the kruvim. Right? If we're saying it's above the kruvim, how do you know it's immediately above the kruvim? Maybe it's way taller than the kruvim. So miksiv l'mayla doesn't say very above. It means right above. I.e., if we apply it to a sukkah, you have the 10 tfachim of the walls of the sukkah, and then the schach right above that. Just like the kruvim, you have the 10 tfachim height of the kruvim, and the wings that are sochachim, that are like schach, are right above that. We're Well, this is all fine and good if you say like Reb Meir that all of the amas in the Beis Hamikdash were middle-sized amas, meaning 6 tfachim. El Reb Yehuda Amar Ama Shobinyan Shisha Tvachim V'Shakelim Chamisha Ma'ika L'Meimar. But according to Reb Yehuda, who says that the amas that they used for building the physical structures were 6 tfachim, but the vessels were 5 tfachim, then what do you do with that? Meaning, according to Reb Meir, who says that the amma used globally, used everywhere in the construction of the Mishkan and its vessels were 6 tfachim, so then this is Givaldik. The height of the Mishkan was 60 tfachim, because it was 10 amas, so 60 tfachim. And then we said that the top of the kapora, of the kruvim, was at a third of the height of 60 tfachim, so 20 tfachim. And we said that the aron was 10 tfachim, and 20 minus 10 is 10. So we know that the height of the kruvim was 10 tfachim, and the wings were above that. So we could learn out for the sukkah that the walls are 10 tfachim at least, and then the schach is above that. However, if you're Reb Yehuda, who says that the structure used amas of 6 tfachim, but the vessels, the kelim, such as the aron, used amas of 5 tfachim, well then our calculation changes. So the height of the Mishkan was 10 amas, which the amma binyan was 6 tfachim, so that's 60 tfachim. And we say that the top of the kruvim was at a third of that, so the top of the kruvim was at 20 tfachim. But now, how do we determine the height of the kruvim? Well, we said, if the kruvim end at 20 tfachim from the ground, and the height of the aron is 10 tfachim, well then that means that the kruvim were 10 tfachim, and the wings were above that. However, if you're Reb Yehuda, the amma used to measure the vessels was 5 tfachim, which means that if the aron was 1.5 amas, so that's 5 plus 2.5 is 7.5, and then the kaporos was another tefach, so that's 8.5. So that means that the top of the kruvim was at 20 tfachim, the aron was only 8.5 tfachim tall, which means that 20 minus 8.5 is 11.5, which would mean that the sukkah should have to be 11.5 tfachim, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So aron v'chaporos kama have lehu tmanya ufalga. The aron and the kaporos is a total of 8.5 tfachim, right? Because the aron is 1.5 amas tall. An amma, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that was used for the aron was 5 tfachim. So that means that 1 amma is 5 tfachim, half an amma is 2.5 tfachim, that's 7.5 tfachim, plus the kaporos is another tefach, that's 8.5 tfachim tall. Pashlu chadsei, which means that 20, which is the height of the top of the kruvim, so 20 minus 8.5 for the aron leaves chadsei ufalga. It leaves 11.5 amas. I'm sorry, I said amas, I mean tfachim. Right, so then I'll say, if we apply that to sukkah, so sukkah should have to be 11.5 tfachim tall. So el Rabbi Yehuda Echsa Gemirila, and we're going to stop with that. That actually it's called Shtikov Vayter. The Amar B'chia Bar Ashi Amarav Shirun Chatzitzun Mechitzun Alach L'Moshe Misinai. We'll end with that. So rather, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he can't learn it out from the calculation of the kruvim. So rather, he learns out the height of a sukkah because it's Alach L'Moshe Misinai. But when it comes to, as Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi says, the name Rav Shiurin measures chatzitzin, and we've seen this is the third time I think that we're seeing this already together. That measurements, chatzitzas and going to mikvah, and mechitzin walls are halach l'moshe misinai. That the halachas of walls are halach l'moshe misinai, and therefore the halachas of the walls of the sukkah are also halach l'moshe misinai. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the reason that the wall of a sukkah is 10 tefachim tall is taka halach l'moshe misinai. Chevre, that was the Hey of Masechta Sukkah, a lot of calculations on Daf Hey, a lot of calculations, whether it's the height of the aron, the height of the tefachim, and then Bichlal at the end, the 6 tefach amma, the 5 tefach amma, and the height of the Beis Hamikdash, the height of the Mishkan, and the Kruvim, and the aron. So, but alright, if you're into that stuff, it's very interesting. So, today's Daf, really the main thing was discussing the height of the sukkah. The minimum height of the sukkah is 10 tefachim. How do we know that? So, first we wanted to say that it comes from the height of the aron. That the aron was 10 tefachim tall, be'etzem. that it was 9 tefachim plus a tefach of the kaporos, 10 tefachim tall. And we know that God never went below, right? He spoke to Moshe on top of the Aron, which means that, and we say that God never came within 10 tefachim of the land, of the ground. So we see that the 10 tefachim of the ground is like its own rishus, and therefore when we're constructing the walls of a sukkah, that we need it to be significant, so it needs to be the height of a wall is going to have to be at least 10 tefachim tall. Fine. Then we got into a whole discussion, well, how do we know bichlal that the Aron was 10 tefachim tall? Because I know that it was 9 tefachim tall because the Aron is an amma and a half. But how do I know that the kaporos is a tefach? So first we said that it's learned out, I think this is Reb Chanina, that it's learned out from the misgeret of the shulchan, which is a tefach tall. We had Rav Huna's opinion, which is that it says pnei in describing the kaporos, and it says pnei by Yitzchak, it says pnei by the kruvim, each of which are a tefach tall. So that's how you know that the kaporos was a tefach tall. But then we go back and we actually question our premise and say, wait, but just like the Aron is 10 tefachim tall, including the kaporos, maybe I'll say that the sukkah is 10 tefachim tall, including the schach, but the walls themselves don't need to be 10 tefachim. With the schach, it needs to be a total of 10 tefachim, but the walls can be shorter than that. So then we learned out from the kruvim, that we say that the kruvim are described as having wings that are like schach above them, and we made a calculation to say that the kruvim essentially were at 20 tefachim, the height from the ground of the Mishkan, and the Aron was 10 tefachim, which means that the kruvim were above 10 tefachim from the top of the Aron, i.e., schach is 10 tefachim above the ground for the sukkah, i.e. that the walls of a sukkah have to be 10 tefachim with the schach above that. To which we say that calculation makes sense according to Reb Meir, who says that the amma used for the Mishkan and the Kelim was 6 tefachim. But according to Reb Yehuda, who says that the amma for the Kelim, such as the Aron, was 5 tefachim, then our calculation is off, because then the sukkah should have to be 11.5 tefachim, not 10 tefachim. So in the end we say it's halach l'Moshe miSinai that the walls of a sukkah have to have a height of 10 tefachim. That was daf hey of Masechta Sukkah. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.